Hi, I'm Randall Eliason. I'm a member of the Alexandria Harmonizers, and I'm part of the team working on this social media campaign about our upcoming contest set at the convention in St. Louis this summer. And that set is going to feature music from the Broadway show Harmony, which tells the story of the German close harmony group, the Comedian Harmonists. The Comedian Harmonists have a fascinating and important history. To talk with us about that history today, we're fortunate to have with us David Wright. David Wright, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So, for those who may not know who you are, why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about your background and history with Barbershop and with the Barbershop Harmony Society.
Okay, well, I go back a ways, probably longer than most of your viewers. I started barbershopping and joined the society. I started going to meetings in 1975. They say I joined in 1976, so this is actually my 50th year, and I get to go to a nice breakfast at International this year for 50 members. I've directed, I write lots of arrangements. I'm involved with Ambassador of Harmony. I'm involved with the judging, have been since the early 80s. I think they tell me I'm the longest serving judge nowadays. I'm not sure of that. Don't quote me on that, but I think that may be true. So I've been involved with that coaching. I'm very interested in what's going on with barbershop around the world. My fingers in a lot of pies with barbershop, and I really enjoy it. I'm retired now. I'm a academician. I'm a mathematician. I was in the math department at Washington University here in St. Louis, but now I'm retired. So a lot of time to spend on barbershop, which is kind of what I do most of the time.
So, one reason in particular that we wanted to talk to you was you also teach a very, very popular course on the history of barbershop harmony at Harmony University. Tell us a little bit about that course and how that interest in history developed for you.
I've always been interested in history, and I was, especially the history of the musical style of barbershop, got really interested in it when I became a member of the old arrangement category back in the early 1980s. And I would sit in meetings with lots of discussions about what does and what does not constitute barbershop. And I got to be very interested in things that would be contributed by Val Hicks, a judge and a coach and really a mentor to a lot of us. He actually taught a history class in the 1980s. It was a bit more of a history of the society, but he involved things that happened before the society began. I was really interested in that stuff. One year they asked him to teach it and he didn't want to anymore. And since I had expressed some interest in it, they asked me to teach it. So I got into action and I visited Val. Sandy and I both went out and visited him in his home. He let me copy lots of things, recordings, slides, and somehow I managed to whip up a course. I was afraid that by Wednesday of Harmony College, I would be running out of things to say. But I sort of putted past the hole, as we sometimes say, and actually had too much stuff. So I actually didn't get over all the material I had planned. And then I began to assemble things. People came to the class and contributed things that I didn't know. That first year that I taught it was 1986. And the course has been taught not every single year, but most years at Harmony College and then Harmony University since then. So this is actually going to be, I think, my 41st consecutive year on the faculty of Harmony University.
Yeah, I know it's incredibly popular. I've been to Harmony University twice, and I couldn't get into the course either time. It's a very highly sought after class. At the beginning of your class goes back to things like Gregorian chants and things like that, and kind of
Yeah,
way
go
forward.
back as far as I can establish any connection or try to figure out where barbershop came from or what it was based on. Of course, a lot of things are conjecture, but a lot of things we can piece together pretty well.
Have you heard of this German group called the Comedian Harmonists? The Harmonizers set at International this year is going to be based on music from the show Harmony, which tells the story of the German group, the Comedian Harmonists. Have you heard of them, and how did you first hear about them?
Yes, and I did see the musical on Broadway. When was it? December of whenever it was won. Same time Joe Cerruti saw it.
2024, I think, maybe. Yeah.
2024. Yep, in New York City. I think we were at the same performance actually. So I had not seen that musical before. Actually, it didn't last very long. It started in November and it closed up in February to I guess, mixed reviews. But I thought it was really good. And yes, I had heard of the Comedian Harmonists. Not early on. I think I can remember way back, it might have been Wilbur Sparks, who was from your chapter and who eventually became the society historian, that I had a great relationship with. It seems like he may have mentioned the Comedian Harmonists to me, but it didn't somehow soak in. The first time I really came to know and appreciate who they were and what they were was in the 1990s when I began going and doing barbershop in Germany. I judged there and taught in their schools and coached. And by then, Germans were very aware of the Comedian Harmonists. You know, after they were pretty much broken up, they were forgotten for a number of years, even in Germany. Somewhere, I think it was 1975, they were interviewed, and the interviews became part of a 4-hour documentary in German, of course. And the interviews with those that survived, I don't exactly know who was still living at that time, and that really sparked interest in the Comedian Harmonists in Germany. No, most of the people didn't know who they were until that time. And now everybody in Germany does. Then on top of that, 20 years later, I believe it was 97, there was a movie called The Comedian Harmonists. And it was a movie by actors, obviously, but they actually lip sync to the actual songs of the recorded songs of the Comedian Harmonists. And of course, that again revived interest in them. So, you know, when I went to Germany, everybody asked me, have you heard of the Comedian Harmonists? I said, yeah, but I haven't really studied them very much. So then I started learning about them, listening to their recordings, listening to them on YouTube, seeing there are a few videos of them, not many, but there are a few. Right. So that's when I really came to know who they were.
Their peak popularity was late 1920s, early 1930s. So in terms of the history, what was going on in the world of vocal harmony at that time, and how did they kind of fit into that?
It was a time of transition. There was the old quartet, sometimes called the Barbershop Quartet then, that had a varied history. It was sung by rich and poor. It was sung by Black musicians and white musicians. It was sung professionally, and it was sung as an amateur activity. There were these recording studio quartets that began recording in the 1890s, and they were popular up into the 1920s. Groups like the Peerless Quartet and the American Quartet, and one that is particularly important to this discussion, they were called the Shannon Four. In the late 20s, it sort of morphed and became a little jazzier. It usually was not a cappella anymore. And the Shannon Four were quite well known. They had a bass named Wilfred Glynn, and Wilfred Glynn made the famous recording of Asleep in the Deep from back around 1912 or 1913, deep bass voice. Anyway, the Shannon Four kind of morphed into a group called the Revelers. So again, they were a vocal quartet with a piano player. So there were 5 of them. And they were kind of based on this old quartet tradition, but they probably viewed themselves as trying to step out of it into songs that were a little more modern, a little more upbeat, a little jazzier. But it was still that same old 4-part harmony with the parts being in the usual positions that we now call barbershop. So they were very much a barbershop quartet with a piano. They had performances. They got together and sang as late, I think, as 1948. They had recordings that were heard by this fellow named Harry Frommerman, who got inspired to start a similar kind of vocal harmony group. So he's the one that started the Comedian Harmonists beginning in 1927. I think they eventually converged to a professional group in 1928. So he rounded up the singers, auditioned them, and launched this thing called Comedian Harmonists. But it was inspired by the Revelers. And the Revelers were very much out of the American tradition of quartet singing. And their original piano player in the Revelers was a guy named Ed Smalley, and he was very much interested in vocal harmony. He'd been involved in quartetting earlier in his life, and he actually wrote a book in 1936, I think. I think it was Close Harmony. And then it's something like 20 barbershop arrangements, something like that. It was just more than just a demonstration of the arrangements, which he did, but it was kind of a textbook about how to sing barbershop harmony and what it is. And that book was used by a lot of our early society quartets for their arrangements. And he also had a radio program where he demonstrated a barbershop quartet in ways that we sometimes do today.
So the Revelers were a key influence. Do you have any idea whether they ever met, the two groups, or whether
They did. They did. They got together in, I believe it was 1929. The Revelers came to Germany. I don't know if they were on a concert tour or whatever, but they had a performance together and they met and they became good friends. And I think they stayed friends after they met. So yes, they did get together. They met. And as far as I know, only once.
So you talked a little bit about their vocal style, how it was 5 voices sometimes instead of 4. What else can you tell us about the vocal style of the types of things the harmonists did?
Very similar to the American quartet style, the usual 4 parts, conventional harmony. Often the melody was in an inside voice, which we now view as a characterizing feature of barbershop, but not always. They had quite a bit of tenor melody. And then they like to just have solo melodies. They featured the bass on melody quite a bit as a solo. But, when they were singing in their standard way, it really was basically barbershop harmony. And maybe after they got acquainted with the Revelers, they might have dug up other recordings of American quartets because there were many, there still are many. You can hear hundreds of songs recorded by quartets at the early part of the 20th century.
So you teach this history course that spans hundreds of years, I guess. Where do you kind of place a group like the Comedian Harmonists in that history and in the way the style developed over time?
I put them right after I talk about the Revelers. So we're in the, about 1930 era. If you look at the videos on YouTube, they're interrupted with other little things. I don't know why, but they are. So I've had to take the video and kind of edit it a little bit so that it plays them continuously. But yes, I play them. I play pretty much a complete song, talk about the kinds of harmony that was happening late 20s, early 30s in connection with, say, groups like the Boswell sisters and the Mills brothers that were also coming out of the barbershop quartet mold.
In terms of the kind of the music theory aspects, I guess, were there arrangements, what you would call pretty much barbershop today? Are there some important differences, things that kind of developed later on, or by the time they came along, was their style of singing pretty solidly what you would call barbershop today?
Pretty much. When they were singing ensemble, it was 4 parts as far as I can tell. It had a piano accompaniment, but then most quartet singing after about 1905 was accompanied. That was recorded, not on the street corner. And they also sang in a vocal style that was a bit operatic, for our modern tastes. We would prefer they smooth out the vibrato and ring the chords better, but they weren't thinking along those lines. They were thinking more probably vocal quality and singing like they'd been trained to sing, which is exactly the way the recording studio quartets in the United States were singing. The Revelers sang in a similar fashion. And a lot of the studio quartets, they had vibratos. The idea of a straight tone to ring chords, I don't think occurred much to white barbershoppers until the end of the 40s, beginning of 1950s. Now, amongst the African American harmonizers, I think they sang straight tones. They were a little more oriented towards chord ringing, but not the professionals that sang in the studio. So I think their vocal style was very much like the professional quartet singers in the United States at the time. They had really very good voices, a bass, a baritone, and 3 tenors. The tenor melody happens quite frequently. So I would say quite a bit of their music had tenor melody.
So the Comedian Harmonists are kind of at their peak in the very early 1930s. Barbershop Harmony Society is formed in 1938. I mean, what does that timing tell us, if anything, about kind of what was going on in vocal music and the influence of groups like the Harmonists on what ultimately became barbershop and the Barbershop Harmony Society?
I don't think the Comedian Harmonists had enough time to influence American harmony singers. That's my honest opinion. early 30s, they were coming apart. They were told they couldn't perform any songs by Jewish uh, composers. They were first very limited, and then they were basically banned. So I don't think there was any real flow of influence from Nazi Germany to America in those years. I would say the American quartet tradition triggered the harmonists. And if they had been the phenomenon that they would have been, had they been allowed to continue, then I think, yes, they would have definitely influenced and been known by America. Witness the fact that most Germans between mid 30s up to 1975, when this documentary happened, didn't even know who they were. They were totally forgotten. Their names were wiped out of history. And they did sing in the United States, and not much. I think they sang in Carnegie Hall. Most of their singing was in other parts of the world. Like I said, I just don't think there was enough for them to have much influence.
You mentioned that you'd seen the Broadway show Harmony and enjoyed it. Tell us a little bit more about your impressions of that show and the story that it tells.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it brought the story home to Americans in a very powerful way. I was moved by it. I think everybody in the theater was moved by it. Here was a group that obviously had a real shared interest in what we do, and they weren't allowed to continue. What would it be like if somebody said, "You can't do this anymore. It's illegal. Don't do it." My only disappointment in it was that it didn't have more actual songs from the harmonists.
Yeah.
It had music that was written by Barry Manilow. I mean, he's a great musician, of course, but I would have loved to have seen them sing some of their arrangements verbatim, like they sang them, and perform them like they performed them. That they didn't have very much of. So that was my one small disappointment. But I think the greater purpose was not to represent their music, but to tell their story.
Anything else you can think of that you'd like to add?
Well, I think it's of great interest to barbershoppers just because they were a vocal harmony group. Our interest reaches outside of just barbershop. If you look within the barbershop community, you see interest in all kinds of groups that have been sung various kinds of harmony over the years, going back to groups like the Mills Brothers, the Boswell Sisters, the Andrews Sisters, the High-Lows, the Four Freshmen, Singers Unlimited, Take Six. All these groups have interest to us because we really love it when we hear voices blending. We're all of the same ilk. The minute we hear vocal harmony, we got to stop. Stop what I'm doing. I want to hear this. That's the way I've been since I was a little kid, actually. It is of great interest to barbershop that there was this group, that they were so popular, and they weren't allowed to last very long. I think that's a story that we should know about and it should be told.
Great. Well, David Wright, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you all in my hometown of St. Louis.
We'll see you in St. Louis. Yeah.
Very soon. Yeah, meet me in St. Louis.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, take care.